Serious. What are some scary urban legends you have heard of? Please like and subscribe to support this channel. Not exactly an urban legend, but here it goes. There was a wealthy old woman my mom used to work for when I was a teenager who lived all alone in a centuries-old house. She had mobility issues, so she had lived in the dining room only for decades, which she had converted to a living room, bedroom. When my mom was busy, I would do odd jobs for the woman who would send me into different rooms of the house to tidy up. These rooms hadn't been opened in 20 or 30 years, and there were 2 or 3 that used to be her late husband's medical practice. There was an actual human skeleton hanging in the examination room, medical supplies that were 30 years out of date all just lying around. It was creepy, but nothing really scary. A few times when I went down to get paid after finishing up, we'd hear noises like someone was walking around in the house, and she'd nonchalantly just say, "It's just spooks." I never believed in ghosts and still don't. One night though, when she was out of town, she wanted someone to watch the house because she was afraid of break-ins. My dad and I stayed over, and after we had locked all the doors and windows and got ready to go to sleep, I heard someone walking in the halls. I shot out of bed immediately to find my dad doing the same. He was an engineer and a die-hard skeptic, so it really scared me when he said, "Let's get the hell out of here." We left in the middle of the night and never went back. This is an old story from my home country of Mauritius. Back in the day, when the island was still very rural, a man was riding his motorcycle at night. While driving, he notices a beautiful woman walking all alone. He stops and asks if she needs a ride home. She says yes and gets on the bike. Noticing that she's cold, he lends her his jacket and continues driving. They arrive in her village and stop at her house. She quickly thanks him and runs to her door. He's so mesmerized by her beauty that he forgets to ask for his jacket. No big deal, he thinks, he'll just come back tomorrow. Besides, it'll give him an excuse to see her again. He returns the next day and knocks on the door. An old lady opens it and greets him. He says, "I accidentally left my jacket with your daughter when dropping her off last night. Could I see her please?" She calls her daughter downstairs, but it's a totally different girl. He says, "No, it was your other daughter," to which the mom replies, "My other daughter has been dead for years." The man was shocked and refused to believe her, so the mom took him to the cemetery to show him the grave. Sure enough, her daughter was dead, and hanging on the tombstone was his jacket. This was kinda something that was just talked about in a pool of friends with me, but here we go anyway. So one day I was out in the woods with a couple of my friends and neighbors. My neighbors had to go back to their house for lunch, so me and my friends decided to split up and look around the woods for some branches to build a fort out of. My friends went a little further out than I did, so I was waiting at the fort for a bit for them to come back when I heard rustling behind me. I figured it was just a deer because there was and still are a ton of them in my area, so I just kinda ignored it. But I kept hearing it back and forth in what sounded like the same spot but getting closer each time. I tried to ignore it, but I eventually turned around and I saw what looked like a person on all fours covered in moss and dirt, and then they ran away. Scared the Jesus out of me, so I ran away, but yeah, never found out what it was. Had to text my neighbors that I had gone inside. My friend saw me sprinting up the hill to my house. Not super spooky, but it gives me the chills to remember what it looked like. Not sure this counts as urban legend because it was super specific to where I grew up, but my elementary school had a big field for kids to play in during lunch and whatnot. On one side, right by the fence, there was a huge tree that someone had tied a bunch of chicken bones to, all up in the branches. So being small and having underdeveloped brains, all the kids believed those were children's bones, and that if you went to the tree alone at night, a man would come out of the roots, eat you, and add your bones to the tree. So this is an urban legend in my school's 4th floor bathroom. Basically, a student walks into one of the stalls and does her business. Then a voice starts to whisper to her saying, "Respicite," over and over. She starts getting freaked out, so she finishes up and leaves as fast as she could without looking back. Then she tells the story to her very religious teacher, who happens to be a good friend of hers. The girl mentioned the weird whispers and the teacher's face turned pale, because the word respicite is Latin, and if translated into English, the voice was telling her to look up the whole time. When I was in first school, ages 4 to 8, somewhere in there was a legend of the Black Rabbit. He would appear around Easter to steal your chocolate eggs and was the sworn enemy of the Easter Bunny. That sounds so wholesome, but as little kids we were terrified. I'm not sure if it was just kids in our school who worried about this or if it's a bigger legend. I remember being in the bathrooms at school and saying to a friend that I imagined this rabbit looked like the ghost bunny from Watership Down, so I imagine we all had watched too much of that horrifying movies. I don't know how common this is, although in my state there is an area of woods referred to as the Seven Gates of Hell. The story goes that there used to be a mental hospital nestled in the middle of the woods. The first and second gate are overtaken by the tall grass and the only original standing parts of the entrance. Apparently there was a massive fire that consumed the hospital. Some perished, others were left to make their way through the woods. If you plan to go, you need to go at sundown. Once you pass through the first two gates and proceed, you begin to hear a rustling in the bushes. However, even approaching the fourth gate is where most people decide to turn back. You feel as if you're being watched or something is rushing around you. The legend has it that you begin to hear whispers or shouts as you're getting closer to the seventh gate. The very last gate is supposed to be the mental hospital in flames. Whether or not you can find the trail to return to the first gate is unknown. I can't remember the name of the creature, but I read a Reddit comment about some US military dudes training in the Asian jungle with either members of the Malaysian or Singaporean military. There was a legend that some floating demon woman would kill those lost in the jungle, but only if they mentioned her by her name. Again, I forget the name of the creature, or if they made a remark about the smell of rotting meat, which was one of her call signs. Long story short, these military guys smell her but were warned by their Asian counterparts not to say anything, and so they run out of the jungle with her chasing along. When they break the tree line of the jungle into a small village, they see the creature scream off into the jungle. IDK if it was a real encounter or some great work of fictitious writing, but that post was creepy to read. Not sure scary, but icky. For context, in my university, there is the anatomy room, where they put all of the corpses used for lessons. It's always guarded and you can only enter with a teacher's permission. Rumor has it that years before it was open for students, there was a student who always went there after classes. One day, he took too long and the janitor went there to tell him that they were going to close soon. Turns out he was there, defiling the corpses, and since then, the anatomy room was heavily monitored. During high school I worked at a movie theater. I was an usher. Yeah, not very exciting, but as a high schooler it was fine. Nevertheless, I was being trained and guided, and had to clean the theaters and take out the trash to the compactor. The elevator to the compactor always felt weird for me, and I'm not claustrophobic at all. After a while, one of my coworkers told me that a past employee years ago had a heart attack in that elevator, and that they found his body the day after. This was the reason why they were so paranoid on always having ushers on pairs and never leaving them alone. Even though I thought it was BS because an employee said it. On Sundays the theater was barely active, and when it was just children, teens, or Hispanic families, which were nice most of the time there. I remember going into a Spanish following movie at one of the rooms. It was room 6 I believe, and I was alone since my companion was late. This was the opening shift, mind you. So I was brushing and sweeping the popcorn after the people left, and I noticed the reflection as if a person was on the projector room. "How's it going, Brandon?" I called, as that was one of my managers, or so I thought. After a while I heard steps coming to my aisle and I chuckled brashly, saying, "What took you so long?" And I froze and paused as there was no one behind me. I thought it was them pulling a prank, but then I heard the steps again and I just rushed down outside the theater. Later on, the managers confirmed to me that in fact a guy died in the elevator to the trash compactor. Also suspicious since the trash compactor elevator is close to theater room 6. And everyone would say not to go alone to theater 6. Every time we would sweep we would notice someone at the projector. But no one was inside. It was strange and creepy. I do not know what it is of that movie theater nowadays. But from friends that have gone, they have told me sometimes they noticed a person on the projector and asked if they still did the old tape projectors. I said yes to make them feel enthralled, but that just made me even more suspicious of that movie theater. Tantal in Arabic. Tantal, the plural tantal, a terrifying and frightening name that the inhabitants of the marshes fear, and even the children of them. When the child does not sleep at night and for some reason, his mother must only threaten him with it, so he calls him, "Sleep, come the tantal," then fear rears in him and he sleeps compelled and patiently over his pain and the reasons for crying. And the marshes look differently completely from what is found in cities, dark alleys, cemeteries and deserts. In the marshes it is fierce and harmful and cuts roads to fishermen and travelers between one floating village and another and controls large areas and deprives human access to it. Therefore fish and birds proliferate in them and their reed forests are intertwined, and there are tens of stories told by the inhabitants of the marshes in their hosts and their homes. They are always frightening stories, including the story of the mighty Hafiz, whom no force in this universe can conquer, or the mother of slaves, in the marshes of the Great Hungary while he is in the form of a black slave. He was alone, making strange noises and changing their sizes and shapes at any moment to frighten travelers. When we asked the elders of the marsh Arabs, their answer was that they are demons out of obedience to God Almighty, and they relate that to myths. Don't search it, it's disturbing. Red tag: a hospital assistant and a nurse stepped inside the elevator, to head to basement 2, where the parking area is. On the way to basement 2, they have to pass by basement 1, which is where the morgue is located. The elevator stopped in basement 1, and the doors opened. The hospital assistant and nurse saw a naked man running towards the elevator. The hospital assistant frantically pushed the close button of the elevator before the man could get in. As the elevator resumed its descent to basement 2, the nurse asked why the hospital assistant closed the door before the man could get in. The hospital assistant said, "Didn't you see the red tag on his wrist? Red tags are for dead people who are scheduled to be embalmed the following day." The nurse was puzzled. "Red tag? You mean something like this?" The nurse showed the red tag on her wrist. The one that sticks with me is, a woman is driving home at night down a dark back road. She passes a big 18-wheeler, which swerves into the left lane behind her right after she passes and begins flashing its lights. She checks to make sure her brights aren't on. They aren't, and speeds up, thinking the truck driver must be angry with her. But he keeps riding her bumper, periodically flashing his lights. Eventually, she pulls into her driveway, and the truck pulls right behind her, brights on full blast. The trucker runs up to the car carrying a loaded shotgun and fires into her backseat. She turns around and sees a dead man laying on her floorboards with a knife in his hand. I don't get in a vehicle without checking the backseat, no matter how sure I am that I locked the doors, because of this old and infamous urban legend. In my hometown there's this road out in the country but not too far from the town itself. It's actually quite pleasant in the daytime, gorgeous in the fall, but at night it's extremely creepy. Local legend is kinda fuzzy, but the most common backstory is there was a man named Old Man, name of road, and he lived on the road with his wife. He was very popular with the local children, and the parents got suspicious of child molestation, so they burned down his house with him and his wife in it. Basically the plot of Nightmare on Elm Street, so that kinda takes away from its credibility, emo, but still a creepy story. There's more lore about the road's backstory, though. It's said there have been several fatal car crashes. My town has a very high DUI fatality rate and the road has many near 90 degrees turns with very little warning. Deep ditches just about guaranteed to flip your car if you go off, and a fast speed limit, so I wouldn't doubt those claims at all. And there's a bridge on the road where it said a girl committed suicide. The town also has some known cult activity, so it's not necessarily uncommon to see hooded figures and bonfires on the road at night. I haven't seen any personally, but I've only been on the road at night a couple of times. I've heard stories of cultists on the road though, and have seen evidence of cult activity in town, a lot of beheaded animals after Halloween, most notably, so I wouldn't doubt it. The game is pretty much you loop the road 3 times in the dark. The first time it appears relatively normal, aside from the creepy graffiti near the bridge. The second time there's a feeling of dread and you're likely to see things in the trees, and the third time Old Man, road name, supposedly appears in your rear view mirror. It's also said that if you stop your car on the bridge it won't start again. I personally played the game once, but I couldn't get my friends to agree to loop it a third time. I will say the second time was a lot scarier than the first, even if only psychological. I didn't see anything too creepy aside from a massive red penis graffitied on the bridge. My friend thought it was a girl's face in a red hood the first loop around. I will note the eerie lack of animals on the road, though, at least the night we played. That area has a lot of raccoons, opossums, deer and such, and we saw quite a few on the way to the road, so it was a little weird we didn't see any on the road itself. In Kentucky, we have enough dogman sightings and stories that we have regional variations. The one in particular that sticks with me is the legend of the beast of land between the lakes. Sightings date back to pre-Jackson Purchase days in that area. French fur trappers described a 7.5-foot tall man covered in thick black fur, with the head of a large wolf and long talons at the end of human hands. The loup-garou, they called M, It made Em avoid western Kentucky like the plague. The legend I heard growing up that always disturbed me was that one of Em killed a whole family locked in their camper, one humid Kentucky May night in the early 80s. Tore the door off its hinges. The boys at the state forensics lab up in Frankfurt couldn't identify the hair sample from the scene. Legend has it the sample came back, canine, unknown. Legend also has it that the state police found the parents and teenage son arranged in a pile of viscera and limbs on the camper floor, and splattered all over the walls. They followed a blood trail 50 yards to a tree line. The state police found the family's little girl 20 feet up a tree, half eaten. I always heard that the feds took over the investigation, covered it up to prevent panic. They even destroyed all the RV pads with the electrical outlets and water lines. I hear that all the state police homicide detectives that were there that morning died in psych wards, disappeared, or changed their name and left the state. Fun campfire story. My grandparent told us about Mada are the ** spirits of drowned victims * that appear as ** bloated corpses with weed tangled in their hair. They are usually described as having a childlike appearance, perhaps because victims of water-related accidents in ancient Vietnam were often children. Story go with the two boys played hide and seek at late afternoon. The younger one hid near the river next to their house, accidentally drowned. He called help but the sound not clearly plus it was dark. The older one heard the sound but not realized it was his brother call for help. After several minutes, he couldn't found his brother so he thought maybe his bro tired of playing and went home, so he went back home. That night, when the family realized their son was missing, they went searching to found their son's corpse. The next day, they funeral for their son. The older at that time saw his brother's face in the window near his brother coffin. His face was blue, weed tangled in his hair, looked straight to the older brother. And every night, he saw his brother on the window, near the gate, near the river. His brother called him to go near the river, to play together again. Too scared, the older brother told his grandma and she said it was not her grandson, it was Ma Da who took the younger brother's figure to deceived people and drowned them. So she made a tool, I forgot what it was, burned some joss papers and chased the Ma Da. But it not the end. The older brother need to stay inside the house until his brother funeral was done. If he go outside, he may can't think straight and go to the river, drowned himself and another Ma Da will take his figure like how they did with his brother again. I even spread it for maybe 5 years, here it is in all its glory. My friend's friend and her boyfriend wanted to fool around, but they didn't have any lube handy. They raided the college kitchen and decided mayonnaise would be their best bet, and it did its duty for them like a charm. A few weeks later, my friend's friend is walking around on campus when she feels something nice in her downstairs. It keeps feeling nicer, 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 and she has an orgasm just walking around, minding her own business. She keeps having orgasms, randomly, and eventually visits her doctor. Her doctor asks her if she's used anything strange for lube recently, and she says, "Mayo. Why?" "Well, you have maggots in your vagina." Quote. My hometown had a man whose face was severely disfigured from an electrical burning. He lost his eyes, nose, and one ear. He would take walks on a lonely stretch of road at night, as he was hesitant to go out during the day. He'd feel his way along with a walking stick. He was hit by cars more than once. He was called Charlie No Face, or the Green Man for no apparent reason. People would go out on that stretch of road listening for the tap-tap of his cane, and offer him a cigarette if they found him during his walk. Skinwalker. Something that pretends to be human, but isn't. Also apparently there's this thing in humans that if we see something that resembles something too human we get uncomfortable. Almost like our ancestors needed this evolutionary defense against something that could mimic humans. There's a theory it could be defense mechanism against dead bodies, but it's not as spooky, so please ignore this. The Jinn. I can remember an encounter that my cousin told me. So my cousin and the rest of the females of the family sleep on one big sheet together, since they all wake up in unison to pray, and it's a cultural thing. She said her aunt woke her up in the middle of the night asking for water, so my cousin went and got her a glassful. When she re-entered the room, her aunt was just standing in the corner of the room, facing the wall. My cousin called out her name, and the distorted, raspy voice of a man answers, "Did you bring me what I asked? You're not supposed to speak to a jinn and you're supposed to give in to small requests, like a glass of water, or else the jinn will come back and ask for something greater." My cousin quietly sets the glass on the ground, and quickly curls up next to her other aunts. She said she stayed awake for hours out of fear, but didn't hear anything. Not her aunt moving from the corner, not the water being drank. Next morning, everyone woke up together, as usual, and my cousin immediately questioned her aunt about last night, though the aunt insisted she had never asked for anything and had just slept soundly. But the glass from across the room was completely empty.